Hello and welcome. How are you, everyone? My name is Eilish De Avalon, and I'm here with the beautiful Miriam Clements from New Zealand. I first became aware of Miriam and her campaign against the genocide that's happening in New Zealand a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely horrified about what's happening. So Miriam's videos on Facebook went viral and was shared over many, many platforms. And I am increasingly horrified with the information coming out from New Zealand about the systematic categorical genocide that's happening throughout New Zealand, throughout her water and her earth, her land, her livestock and her wildlife, and the people. And it disturbs me greatly, both as an Australian with friends and family and very close people to me that are native to New Zealand. And it disturbs me greatly what's happening. I wanted to bring Miriam on today so that she can explain a little bit about the campaign that she's conducting to try and stop this genocide, and a little bit of information about the poison of 1080 and just what's happening in New Zealand. New Zealand is being poisoned. It is happening. It has happened. There are already dead fish and dead cows and dead wildlife. There are already sick people and school children being taken to hospital, and terrible symptoms that are coming out as a direct result of being poisoned. This is affecting the primary industries as well. And I'd really like to discuss what's happening and what we can do about it. So thank you very much for joining us, Miriam. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
So with a population of 4.8 million, New Zealand is a small island nation, but with the amount of poison that's being dumped on there, you'd think there was hundreds of millions of people in New Zealand with the dosage that's being meted out at the moment. What is 1080, Miriam? Why is it being dumped on the people? And why in such heavy quantities? If we could start from there, perhaps.
Sure. Well, 1080 is monofluoral acetate, and it's one of the world's most lethal torture poisons. It's a reproductive agent, so it targets your reproductive organs to bring about sterility, but awful diseases of the reproductive organs: breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, are very, very common as a result of consuming this sort of EDC chemical. It's called an endocrine disruptor chemical. It's a nerve agent. It's a neuro agent. It's neurotoxin. It tortures animals to death over many, many hours. But it then restructures the water to the frequency of an enhanced version of the poison. It metabolizes into a fluorocetrate molecule, which then travels through. It stays whole, and it travels through into the food and water system. And that is the molecule that kills the cells. It interrupts your Krebs cycle, so your cell can't transition food and light and water into energy anymore, and it kills and mutates the cells, and the mutated cells is what then leads on to things like cancers. But you've got motor neuron disease. It alters the mitochondria of the DNA, so it restructures your DNA, it reprograms the mind effectively. It can cause depression, really lethal effects on fetuses. So unborn children will have deformities inflicted and developmental problems, things like that. It's just the most disgusting toxic poison in the world, and most countries have banned it, although I'm sure that's about to change since we're exporting it now to apparently a lot of countries, but historically most countries have banned it. And it's been dumped, tons and tons of it are being dumped right over our natural bush ecosystem. So for a long time, people have been, counting how many animals or wildlife are torture poisoned to death en masse, mass torturing all our animals across our natural reserves. It's crazy. But without connecting to the fact that it's been deliberately dropped in all of our rivers and streams, and those rivers and streams run into our town and city water supplies. And you've got then a water that is effectively like a chemical that you're drinking. It's in diluted form, so maybe further down the water supply you're getting it in parts per trillion or parts per million, or parts per billion, which has different effects over time, but the bioaccumulation of toxicity over time on the lakes, rivers and streams is killing it with toxic algae. We can't swim in our lakes, rivers and streams anymore, and it's definitely because of this poison. And of course in the body as well, the bioaccumulation over time leads to the complete destruction of the body and the breakdown in many, many deadly diseases, as our Prime Minister with her, all-seeing eyes was promoting this week at the UN as on par of our future major problem in the world was climate change, terrorism and deadly diseases. Apparently she already knows that because she's inflicting it by tons and tons of poison that are capable. I calculated on just one of the poisons alone, monofluoacetate 1080, and there's many being spread, but at 2 kgs a hectare over the amount of land they've spread it over this year, which I've been in court trying to stop them, but since my High Court hearing in August, they've spread enough to kill at 2 kgs a hectare approximately 41,000 people, and at 6 kgs a hectare, which was the plan, and it's not published as to which one they're doing, but it's enough to kill 122 million at 6 kgs a hectare. That's assuming that they don't do overruns, and many of the pilots speak of them doing overruns. They go far outside the zone that they're supposed to be poisoning. They poison the waters that they're supposedly not supposed to poison on the permits. The same people are making products that are 5% active ingredient. We're told they're only using pellets that are 0.015% active ingredient, but we have no idea. So the poison could be much more intense on the pellets. We don't know. They always overfly. So my estimation and they planned 6 kg per hectare. So at 6 kg per hectare plus overfly plus potentially more intense poison pellets, they could be spreading much more poison. But already with as you said, population of 4.8 million people, spread enough of just one of the many poisons they're spreading to kill that many people, you're killing nature. And in this case, you're artificially inflicting climate change. You're bringing about the 6th extinction. This is an insecticide. It kills all the microorganisms in the soils, so it's killing the forest. It's rendering the land non-arable, so it won't grow food. It's killing all the insects. All these dead animals lay strewn all over the bush, and the insect, like the maggots, for example, are poisoned as soon as they start, breaking down the bodies of these dead animals, so they don't break down properly. And you've got mosquitoes who are festering off the blood of these dead animals and then injecting that directly in people's bloodstream, making them sick, or giving them blood poisoning. And there's media circulating now from this controlled media cabal that, sepsis is on the rise. Well, yeah, that'll happen if you get mosquito injects 1080 poisoning in your blood. And then the bees are pollinating on the blood of the dead animals, so that's spreading through our food system like that. It's going right through the water, obviously, into our agriculture system. There's no filters on the troughs, so and it is a sterility drug. This at the lowest quantities, parts per trillion, this is a sterility drug. It causes a massive miscarriages and fetal deformities. So there's one guy I was speaking with who's about to write an affidavit for my case who, his oldest child his whole reproductive organs were deformed. He'll never have children. And all his dogs died and a lot of livestock died. And that's the effect of 1080 poisoning. So we're talking about the artificial creation of A, climate change, B, the 6th extinction, C, the end of farming, small farming as we know it, and C, the end of fertility. And this stuff has been talked about for a long time, but until you're confronted with it happening in real time, it's unbelievable to most people. But there's no doubt what's happening here is it's a chemical extermination of a population. We cannot sustain the level of poisoning they're spreading. And the 2 former prime ministers prior to Ardern, one of which was sort of Ardern's mentor, or she was the protege, she institutionalised this killing program into policy. Then Ardern worked with her as a personal assistant, then was sat in Parliament for 9 years, having never won the vote, but she was there for a reason, and it's to lead this it's to leave this killing regime, definitely. She knows exactly what she's doing. She was at the UN this week promoting all the deadly diseases we're going to get as a direct result of her conduct, which I've been in court trying to stop desperately, but I'm still trying to work out if the judges are unable to stop it, unwilling to stop it, or just can't quite believe what I'm saying still, you know? It's, I don't know. Anyway.
It's absolutely horrendous. And thinking about motor neuron disease and sterility and the deformities, it reminds me of the defoliants used in the Vietnam War with Agent Orange, Agent Blue, Agent White, and all the different herbicides that were used there, that has led to multi-generational DNA damage that's still, visually seen today. You can see it amongst the people affected still by the, as you said, the bioaccumulation of these toxins. And it is cumulative. Fluoride is cumulative. And even in small doses, micro doses, this is like homeopathic poisoning if we're way downstream. It's still bioaccumulative. So it's deeply disturbing. And I really fear for the future of New Zealand's agriculture and primary industries. I fear for New Zealand's DNA, all the people that are affected, and they're beautiful, beautiful people, strong, amazing warriors, gorgeous, loving families that are being affected. And if you think it's not affecting you because you're not in New Zealand, you're wrong. Because it's also happening, Miriam, as you said, in Perth and in other countries as well. Not just here in Australia, in certain areas, but other places too. It reminds me of the Georgia Guidestones and how it says there to keep the human population down to 500 million. Well, we're seeing the Georgia Guidestones being enacted with the programs, these genocidal programs. I'm so deeply disturbed by it. I just don't want people to gloss over this and think that we're being sensationalistic, or it's just a few possums, or, it's just a few pests. This is a huge quantity. Do you have any documentation on quantities being dropped? You said that there was...
Yeah, I've just been working on a summary document today, actually, for the court. I could pull it up, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share.
Okay.
Okay. So, you've got here, can you see?
Yep.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it clearly. Yep.
Okay, so you're not looking at because I can't see.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is just a summary. Like I've just been just putting, this is rough, but just putting the map of the area poisoned, and then how many hectares, and calculating at 30 grams to kill a human. Actually, if you look at it in terms of human, how much poison are they dropping to kill a human? And you've got here at 618,000 hectares poisoned since. Now, I've got the dates here. This includes some poisoning back from August 2017. But if you look like right down where it gets to my screen is not super obedient, but where it gets to the west coast and stuff, they're about to mass poison. I'm not sure how many of these green areas have been poisoned. They say it's already poisoned, but all these red areas haven't yet been poisoned. And it's just so much poisoning. Look at that. So huge attacks about to happen on the west coast and Southland, and so this is the west coast, the amount of poison. So enough at 6 kgs per hectare to kill 56 million people. And you've got their, like, this is their their reports. I've copied it off their reports and then I've summarised it. So at 2 kgs per hectare on the west coast, that's our beautiful Southern Alps. It's enough to kill, nearly 19 million people. That's been dropped into our ecosystem. But when that dilutes, okay, it's not torturing people to death straight away, but they're drinking it through their water. It's pollinated through their food by the bees, or mosquitoes spread it, or, the secondary poisoning. Look how many attacks, so many. And then so many coming on the south, in Southland as well, all the red on the other side. And then Otago, lots coming up in Otago.
And as we can see, it's been happening for about a year now, since August.
No, this is just what's published. So I've been trying to get the statistics for the last 50 years of what's been poisoned, but it's been a real fight to get it. I'm months into my request, my official information request to get it, and I've had silly answers and saying, we don't apply the poison, we only authorise it. So I've had to re-request for what poison they authorise, things like that. So they're trying every way they can not to give it. So I've just broken down to how much poison has been spread in each area. For example, Canterbury, enough poison to kill 14 million people, between 5 and 14 million people. In West Coast, enough poison to kill between 18 and 56 million. In Wellington, enough poison to kill, less there, theoretically, enough poison to kill between 700,000 and 2.1 million. So less quantities in the city, I've noticed, but they're really, really going for it down the South Island. Now this is only one of the poisons. So I'll come back to you. How do I get back to the screen?
Just unshare, so you can just go back to that green square and unshare it, and then we can, if you want to.
Yeah. I'll stop share. Okay, I'm a first timer at this program. Okay, am I back?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
So the point is that that's only one of the poisons. So I'm still doing now these, and the summaries change all the time. So I'm still doing the updated summary for Britificum, which is you hemorrhage to death. They've spread that over a lot of our island ecosystems, and after they do it, there'll be a lot of wildlife wash up dead, and it makes them hemorrhage to death. But I mean, all of our rivers and streams run out into the ocean as well. So if they're spreading enough to kill hundreds of millions of people across all of these poisons, and all of the rivers and streams are flowing out into our ocean, then they're poisoning the ocean to death. And so what Jacinda Ardern with her crystal ball said at the UN yesterday about deadly diseases, sure, you've got, someone ate sushi the other day and he showed up with a flesh-eating disease, because this is mutating through the food system into our bodies, and it's breaking, it is going, this much poison is going to create all sorts of horrific plague-like diseases. That's why I kept, because I've been fighting in the courts to stop this since May and have Jacinda Ardern removed from power, because I'm like, here is the crime that she intends to commit. And because of certain judges' minutes, I was able to get the International Criminal Court to accept my argument for review, which is great because I've been working on that argument for 7 years, and I've got 7 cases registered with the ICC under review. And I mean, it's brilliant that they're on this case, because the New Zealand judicial system has definitely not stopped it yet, and I'm up to my 12th judge now. Potentially 12th, perhaps 11th. I've got a criminal claim and a civil claim that are going. And it's very clear it was premeditated genocide, by chemical extermination with those quantities that they planned to spread. And she should have been stopped. But the court has consistently ruled to allow. And my 3-hour hearing in the High Court recently in August, and I held off the attacks until that time. Most of the attacks didn't happen. She pushed one attack against Arid Island, the Great Barrier Island waters, when she came back from maternity leave. But then I had my 3-hour High Court hearing, and the judge ruled on that he doesn't have the power to stop extensive government programs. It's not a justiciable issue to stop extensive government programs. So this is this is an extermination program. It's irrational. It's beyond their power. It's error of fact, error of law. It's every single argument for a judicial review possible, and it breaks most of the crimes in the Crimes Act. But they are being shielded from liability because the three people with the power to the three people with the power to stop this crime are the head of state, which is the Queen, the Governor General, Governor Patsy Reddy, and Jacinda Ardern. But it's Jacinda Ardern's budget. She's first among her equals, budget of $436 million to run this extermination program. And it's intensely filled with propaganda and fraud. So they are promoting they build cover narratives for the effect of these poisons. And they promote them as diseases, like this new Mycoplasma bovis disease, which is the same as Mycobacterium bovis, and that's what they inject into animals to cause TB. And the symptoms are exactly the same across TB, Mycobacterium bovis, Mycoplasma bovis, exactly the same symptoms in the animals. And it's 1080 poisoning, effectively. And so they can spread all this poison, and then as it flows out through the rivers and streams to be consumed by the stock and bioaccumulate in their body and toxicity over time, they start to build up the symptoms of this poisoning depending on the dose, and they're either tortured to death quickly or slowly. But then they have a fake cover narrative disease ready to promote. So it's a communist regime. It's mass propaganda of a big lie to cover the consequence of their poisoning. And the ultimate consequence of their poisoning, of course, and will happen, is climate change and the sixth extinction. If you're mass poisoning a forest, you're creating a huge carbon imbalance. You're poisoning the land to death. This poison kills all the microorganisms. We've got cowrie dieback is a big issue at the moment. It's from the poison. They're killing the trees, the microorganisms, the insects, all of our resource, what we would eat if there was a natural disaster and we had to forage for food. Hunters would go and hunt for deer and pigs and tar. They're killing all of those by poisoning, and the stock that we just had a big issue in New Zealand about them planning to shoot the 10,000 tar this weekend, and that's been stopped. But I wrote several aggressive emails to Winston Peters yesterday, who's current Prime Minister, because Ardern's out of the country, because I've got my injunction is currently with the judge, has instructed the Crown to respond to it by October 8th. But that was going to be after the tar were killed. And my injunction was to stop the mass slaughter programs and the poisoning programs, because it's a war on life, And anyway, he's obviously used his power as Prime Minister to instruct our Conservation Minister to stop the tar cult, which is great. It's brilliant timing, really, that he was Prime Minister, because if it was Ardern, all those animals would be absolutely slaughtered, shot to death this weekend. She's a fucking psychopath. Oh, I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people struggle with that because they see, baby and mum and the big parade and this big smile everywhere and the media supporting it. But there is a clinical definition for psychopath, and it certainly substantiates the person who is spreading enough poison over a natural ecosystem of wildlife to mass torture all of the wildlife to death indiscriminately. Poison doesn't have cognitive function to focus on possums, which is her boogeyman that she promotes. Kills everything, including the birds, including the natives, and all of the foliage and undergrowth and the native flora, everything. And she's artificially creating the sixth extinction. They're promoting it everywhere, and it's created by chemicals. So, this is just such a big crime, and people can't fathom, because humans are not, we don't have predators after us, right? So they can't fathom that the apex predator, which is us, would be targeted by a group of individuals with enough power and money to decide that our population is too great and our way of life is too excessive. With instead of the Sunday roast we used to eat, we have meat for breakfast, lunch and dinner, don't we? So they've decided that's wrong, and they're probably right. But the way to fix it is not through mass chemical extermination, and that's their method of choice. And it's really sick in the head, but it's happening now,
It's so shocking. I was talking to someone that's Indigenous to New Zealand here in Australia last week, who said that his uncle was out hunting. Well, he went to try and hunt on the east coast of the North Island, and he said that the wilderness was just completely quiet. There was no birds. There was nothing to hunt. It was just deathly quiet. It was really, really eerie. And like came home empty-handed, but like, and this was to hunt some wild boar. That the forest, the wilderness, is deceased, is dead. Can we just comprehend this for a minute? We might have enjoyed movies such as, you know, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and things like that that were filmed in the most pristine parts of the world with the most pristine waters. These lands are gone. As you said, the microorganisms in the soil, our own inner gut bacteria, our inner flora and fauna, it's affecting things that we can't even fathom yet.
It's reprogramming our DNA, you know, like, and you look at, you know, I was thinking about, because I've got this habit on Facebook, if I get, I work on frequency, so there's low frequency and high frequency. If I get low frequency from anyone, in whatever way, if it's just an energetic response to them, or if it's the way they've approached me or what they've said, I block them, because I just don't want low frequency in my life, because they drag you down. Like the words or their energy brings you down to their level, their low vibrational frequency. So I'm just like block. And it's a really good habit. Anyone out there who, you know, struggles with social media, it's anyone you get a bad feeling off them, block them, get their frequency out of your life, because everything is frequency. But they are, because these chemicals restructure, you know, they're the anger minerals. If you test your hair after a good dose of 1080, you'll have the anger minerals in them. I reckon if they tested the hair of a lot of criminals after, you know, violent crime, they would find these anger minerals that 1080 produces. You've got a lot of depression and anger, and reprogramming the mind and the mitochondria of the DNA. So reprogramming the whole nature of humanity, and that is why there's a whole lot of vile, nasty beasts out there that you have to avoid, because they have been drinking poison, and so they are poisoned. They are poison. They become the poison, just like the water becomes the poison, and everything is energy, you know. And so they are reprogramming humanity to be like a state of hell on earth, with vulgar, vile behavior, vulgar, vile energy. And, you know, a lot of people are unfortunately already affected, because you can't be drinking poison and eating poison every day and stay at a certain vibrational level. And I did a lot of research on this at one point, where, you know, the oils, essential oils, are, you know, 92 hertz or above. Is it megahertz or hertz? I forget. Megahertz, I think. And humans vibrate, like if you go below 23, you are sick, like you're dead, I think. If you go below like 47 or something, that's when you start to get the flu, or if you vibrate lower, you start to get cancer. So, and if you know, your brain would normally vibrate at 72, you know, super intelligent people would vibrate at 92. So, and then, you know, so we're all, and dead food, you know, dead food or alive food would have their each vibrational level. And so we are all about frequency, what we consume, and if we have a coffee, we drop like 15. So, you know, like negative. So everything we are and do and think and feel, our energy is shifting, and that's life. And they're completely restructuring the frequency of life right now, to a really low, sick vibrational level. They're killing nature. They're killing everything alive. I know it's a really esoteric way to talk about it, because obviously I can't argue that in court. But that's the way I perceive it. You know, they're restructuring, they're reprogramming everything about us right now, and by chemicals. It's terrifying. It's a giant geoengineering experiment, totally illegal, and leaders like Ardern are getting away with it by saying, A, the world's most lethal chemical is totally safe in water, which is an outright lie. It's a real crime. And B, that it's all about protecting birds by poisoning them somehow, and you know, killing possums that barely exist now because they're all dead anyway from many years of poisoning, and they eat leaves anyway, and killing stoats, which eat rats, not birds, unless forced to by this poison. And just totally playing God in a most ridiculous way. It's a political ideology being forced on the people. It's completely irrational. It's completely unnecessary. It's a big lie. It doesn't protect our native species by poisoning everything to death. And yet a lot of the population have brought this narrative because A, they're busy, B, they most don't care about anything the government does. They just want to have a happy life. And C, I think a lot of people have drunk too much fluoride and are a bit stupid. I don't know what the answer is, but it's taking people a long time to kind of go, it's very obvious that the world's most lethal chemical in our water is the reason why we're getting this mass collapse of our physical environmental ecosystem and the mass collapse of our health.
And just 1 teaspoon is enough to kill 100 people, is that right?
Yeah, like 30 grams of poison baits at only 0.015% active ingredients, so tiny, like 1.5 out of a kg is, does that make sense? So 1.5 grams out of every kg is poison out of the baits, and 30 grams of the baits to kill a human. So yeah, effectively, it's roughly right. It's roughly right what you said, but
I wonder what the pilots and what the people dumping this poison are thinking. Like, it's such bad karma for them too. Speaking esoterics, it's such terrible karma. I mean, that's just not going to go well for them. Not going to go well for the politicians or anybody that supports this genocide program. And who's funding this,
But it's like Hitler said, tell a big lie, repeat it, make it simple, tell it over and over again, and everyone will believe it. And some people have been questioning it, and I've got affidavits of people whose lives were completely destroyed by this poison. Their neighbours were dropping dead of cancer, their whole families were sick, their livestock were dying and sick. It was just an apocalypse. And but they're ignored. They're often intimidated by the police. So the people who are consciously aware of it are really suffer, like loss on every front. A lot of people are controlled opposition. So I've got 7 legal arguments for the ICC, but I've worked around the world on different ecosystems, defending different ecosystems with my legal argument that I interpret the Rome Statute against environmental destruction. It's kind of a world first, but I think it's getting traction. This case wouldn't have got accepted unless I'd done all that background work with the other cases for the rainforest and the coral reefs and that sort of thing, that's for sure. And it's clear. I just got distracted by something. Where was I?
So, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Miriam, was you're actually getting hit by EMF weapons as a result of being a direct activist on the front line here. And who's responsible for harming activists, the ones that are standing up for Mother Earth, for Gaia, for us, for all her children on this beautiful planet? Whether you see it as a globe or flat really doesn't matter at the moment. The fact that we're here on this plane of existence and it's being systematically poisoned, and those brave people such as yourself that are speaking out against it and trying to stop this from a legal perspective are being hit. It's just incredible.
Yeah, well, in my case, in the last 2 months, I mean, I've been doing this since May, but in the last 2 months, I've had several direct hits, which literally led me to have a swollen brain and seriously bruised lobes for I've had this special cream which helps me to recover from it, but if I didn't have that, I feel like I would have died. Like, it's just insanely painful. There's nothing worse than a bruised brain and a swollen brain. You feel your brain like against your skull. The first time it happened, I was on the phone with my mobile phone with my headphones in, and obviously to do this case I was calling people up and down the country, and I was on the phone all the time. And this burst came through the phone. It was like being spun out. Like, I just felt like I'd spun out. My brain was felt like I was just drunk for a moment. And which is not a common feeling for me. I don't get drunk, but a couple of occasions I remember that in my life. So that's what it felt like. It was like us being stunned through it, and it was through the mobile phone network. And oh my God, I didn't know what had happened. I just thought, God, that was weird. The next day my lobes were really, really bruised, and within 3 days I had a swollen brain, and I didn't know if I was going to survive it, to be honest. And I finally got that recovered. And I have to keep fairly safe. Like with I have an issue with helicopters. That sounds a bit ridiculous, but if I go outside and there's a helicopter following me within 5 minutes, or a small plane, so it's hard to explain. Yeah. And so I like to keep my curtains closed these days, and my doors closed, because one time I was standing on the balcony. I was outside looking at the plane. It was a small plane that time, I think, and they got me with an electricity bolt in my breast. Well, I've never felt something. It was like an electricity bolt that just traveled from one side to the other. Like it just kept moving around, just insanely painful. And again, I had a really special cream that I could use that helped me cope with the pain and managed to get rid of it. But they have those weapons now where they can damage your cells. It's sublethal. They damage your cells, but of course that triggers mutated cells, triggers cancer and everything else. And so the breast thing happened first. I wouldn't have survived it without this cream, so I'm just really blessed that I'd found it, because my experience with 1080 poisoning. I was in a situation, I think I was set up, really. I was targeted because I'd done these cases for so long, and of course they knew I was coming back into the country, and this is the one legal argument with the ICC, my legal argument, that gives us any chance of stopping this crime, so I think I was targeted, and I was targeted with poison, and I went to the doctor and had all the tests. And of course, when you are poisoned, they can't do any tests to check for the poison, but you're in agony, and I knew that in this case, I knew that I'd eaten it. It's hard to explain, and I was immediately sick after my meal, and no tests showed up, and I searched out this tonic to help. It's hard to explain. It's mostly used on animals, but humans have used it to great success, but it's sold as an animal product. But I just knew it was the right thing to take, and it healed me, and nothing else had worked. I'd gone to the doctor, and they'd given me all sorts of gastro pills. And here's what's scary, is they'll give you the gastro pills, and they'll give you, each box has got 100 pills in it, and they'll give you 10 or 20 boxes, different doctors. So they know that there's no cure. They know they've got masses of stock of these pills, and it's for the poison. They know this is pharmac in New Zealand. So they've got these pills which they barely work. They barely give you any remedy at all. But so I found this tonic, and with the tonic I found this cream, and it helped me survive, really. But and then another time I felt, so then I started realizing that when I was using my Google book, especially when I was using YouTube videos on my Google book, again, the frequency in my temples would be bruised by the afternoon. So I've shut down permanently my Google book. And Google promote themselves as a defense company, the future defense company, number one defense company in the world. And with Syria, when I was researching the Syrian war, I noticed that they were using, they had working groups in America where they were testing a lot of the mind control technology from DARPA. So DARPA was developing mind control technology, and Google were putting it to the test. And definitely they are dealing with electromagnetic frequency weapons, weaponized technology. So the frequency of the screen, the frequency through, when I'd watch a YouTube video on my Google book, my heart would totally leap, like skip, like it was like a zap on my heart. And so I stopped doing that, and I haven't had it since. Keep away from helicopters and my windows, haven't had the shot from there. And literally keep off the telephone now. I don't use the telephone since, if I do, I'm literally walking around with it buried under pots and books and everything, so that I'm as far away from it as possible. But yeah, I was seriously 3 serious attacks. I don't know if I finished the helicopter story, but the fourth attack was with another helicopter when I had my window open. I was recording a video, and at the back of my house, and I could hear the helicopter coming, but I was halfway through this video, so I thought usually I'd shut my window immediately, and I didn't, and they got me again, and again, bruised temples and swollen brain, and I mean, it's been seriously, I mean, it's the worst kind of attack you can have, because the one thing I value is my brain. And yeah, I mean, there were days where it was difficult to talk, your sentences don't come out right, you mix up your words, like the effect on your cognitive function is very clear. And I'm probably quite energetically quite strong, so able to resist it to a point where I think a lot of people wouldn't be. But what is scary about this is so I avoid every way that I've noticed it affects me, and I set up as much as possible to make sure that I'm not affected again. But what's scary is that this is the kind of technology that is possible through the 5G poles that they're planning to set up in many of the cities, and some of the cities are already getting these poles. And the technology that DARPA have developed, that Google have been testing, and I'm sure Facebook are probably integrating with this as well. That is really mind control through frequency. Like it's torture through frequency, or groupthink, controlling narratives for entire communities. You can control people's emotions, make them depressed, happy, angry, sad, everything, through these frequency technologies. It's certain they're developed and they use psychotronic warfare, and these new poles that they're planning to put in many of the cities, and some of them have already got them, are totally capable of inflicting this on entire streets. And if you couple that with the new technology, like the UN have just developed a technology where you can track a person to every 3 square meters all across the earth. And so if you couple that technology, frequency technology, to that ability to track people to every 3 square meters all across the earth, it's population control. It's a method of controlling people in the future as they start to, their social behavior starts to completely deteriorate because of the poisoning that they're consuming. It's terrible. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not an expert on EMF frequencies by any means, but I'm more I have been, until it personally affected me. I didn't really look at it much, but I'm more interested in the electromagnetic frequency weaponization of weather, because that's a serious concern right now.
Yeah, and what's happened over in America with the controlled weather over there, the hurricanes over there in the Carolinas recently, even recently at a UFO conference called Contact in the Desert, Patty Greer on a recent video was saying that the participants, the speakers at that UFO conference, a lot of them that were going against the popular narrative or the accepted narrative, were getting hit, and people were ending up in wheelchairs, paralyzed at the airport. This stuff is very real, and 5G network is a weapon in combination with poison. So we're getting poisoned in the material world, and then in the energetic frequency world, we're getting hit with 5G, which is weaponized communication. It's not for us, like faster internet speeds or faster downloads or whatever. That would have been enough. The 3G network for that. But this is the next step, and it is, I believe, part of that depopulation agenda, part of Agenda 21.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the one thing I was going to mention, my new thing, is a frequency through the room. When I leave my room, I can't hear it, but when I'm in my room, there's a frequency here. It's like ringing in my ears, but it's not. I discovered the word tinnitus because I was like trying to find out what it was, but it's not that, because if I leave the room, I'm fine. It's just when it's in the room, and you can download spectrograms where you test the frequency. So I've been doing that, but it's not that, it's something else. But it's kind of like, at times it's like a torture. It's like a form of torture. And but if I leave the room, it's totally fine. And so it's like, what can you do when it's through your house? But yeah, it's a serious problem, because with the mutation of cells, like if you're affected, like I've experienced the one where, the one that's targeted my brain, one that's targeted my heart, one that's targeted my breast. And of course, so you could literally have a stroke or a heart attack, you could develop breast cancer, or you could develop brain cancer. And there's nothing, no one would ever know. And it's the same thing with the 1080 poisoning. Some of our best scientists who have been outspoken about 1080 poisoning, and doctors, like we had a doctor, Peter Scanlon, who was at the World Health Organization talking about how 1080 would cause fetal deformities, and it would restructure the fetus so that people would be dying young. They'd get depression in their early teens, which they are. They would get strokes in their early 20s and die from that, or become retarded or wheelchair bound. And that's the kind of lots of cancers in their teenage years, which is happening. Lots of ovarian cancers and things like that in teenagers at the moment. And so, and then he died, by really quite a quick cancer, and he was really young. And of course, put a bit of 1080 in someone's drink, and they're going to die by cancer. So, you've got this really, really, awful, dangerous, evil program being run to wipe out millions of people by chemicals and electromagnetic warfare, weaponized water and weather. And then you've got the methods to take out those who contribute any reasonable obstruction, or a chance at obstruction, or a dialogue that starts getting people thinking. And there's so many ways that they can target you, and you'll be dead and fairly shortly. And honestly, this is only solved if obviously I'm a bit biased and I work on my plan to solve it, but I've got three cases that if they were prosecuted, they would actually take out most of the criminals involved in this. And they're all registered under review with the ICC. Obviously, I'm up to 80 something updates to the ICC on this case, because they take jurisdiction when it's evidence that the national judicial system are failing to protect, or unwilling or unable to protect, or to operate, to prosecute or investigate consistent with justice, or if they are shielding those who are criminally liable from justice. And definitely one of those options are happening here, because I've been in the court since May. I'm up to 11 or 12 judges, depending on who's sitting on my criminal injunction at the Court of Appeal right now, and criminal appeal. And again, I don't know that, if the judge is ruling that they don't have the power to stop the program, then they are doing their best to. In one of the cases, especially the criminal claim, which is against the Queen, Jacinda Ardern, and Governor Reddy, the three head positions in our country, who are responsible for this crime. Everyone else is their subordinate, technically, according to the law. Whether some people are obsessed with DOC, the Department of Conservation, having the power in this, and perhaps they do, but not legally, So I don't know what the answer is, but unless we get a judge's order to stop it, and definitely my 3 International Criminal Court arguments, I've got one argument they accepted last year against climate change, but it renders climate change as a product of a direct environmental destruction. So the pollution of our water, air and soil, largely at the point of extraction. People don't think about this, or they're not told about it, but a lot of the pollution happens, at the point of extraction, the fracking, the mining, the oil extraction, etc. And they're not told about that, because that would make the industrialists criminally and financially liable for the pollution at the point of extraction, which is where most of the imbalance of the environment comes from. And my case holds them to account. So it lists all of the private owners of dirty industry right across the world, and the biggest companies. That's still under review by the court. Now, there's 2 ways to deal with it. If they don't voluntarily transition to completely sustainable businesses, then they can all be arrested and all their money seized. But the court has the power to order that they can't profit from dirty industry until they transition their businesses. So it's like this strong but reasoned mechanism to force transition, which is that whilst you produce dirty industry, you cannot profit, you cannot keep the profit. That goes into a fund to remediate the environment that you're destroying, and to remediate, compensate the victims of the environmental destruction on their health. And once you've transitioned your business, then you can retain that profit again. So it forces the companies to start immediate transition profiles of their businesses in order to retain their profits. Are you there?
Yeah, I
You
am.
froze.
Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so that combined with this case, which has been under review by the ICC since July 23rd, would lead to an astounding change, and it would really round up a lot of the criminals who are the ones who have profited from the consumerism and the sort of the system that they find gross is what has made them rich and powerful. And now, in order to resolve the problem, which they largely were responsible for causing, because, you know, I mean, people consume what is brought to market, you know, so they're responsible for this. And yet now they are misusing their power to reduce the population, exterminate by chemicals. It's a genocide. There's no question. We can't sustain this level of poisoning. Agriculture stock won't sustain it. They'll be poisoned to death. Very, very agonizing. It's so cruel. Mass poisoning our wildlife, restructuring our water, engineering our DNA, and inflicting a massive sterility. You know, as Jacinda Ardern promoted this week, and I keep saying that because it's really important, because it's like, oh, how can you promote that? Our future issue is terrorism, climate change, and deadly diseases. The only way you can promote that is because you know you've been spreading enough poison to cause them, and you will inflict deadly diseases. So, you know, she really let her cat out of the bag with that one. But at minimum, the sublethal doses of this cause sterility. It's a reproductive toxin. And erectile dysfunction. People who are drinking this water get erectile dysfunction. You know, just I think it a lot of the gender confusion, it chemically changes the brain, and so it can you know, totally reorientate you sexually. Very much capable of doing that, you know. So
Unbelievable what's happening. And the other thing that's quite peculiar with all this is rich moguls like Richard Branson and others are buying huge tracts of land in New Zealand, which you know, like people from Silicon Valley, the higher-ups, the billionaires, they're buying great big swathes of land in New Zealand. What are they hoping to achieve? To wipe out the human and agricultural and wildlife populations and then take over? Is that their modus operandi?
Look, they definitely have all the tech. They have 2 lines of technology. Well, 3. Okay, they have the line of technology that enables them to completely remediate the ecosystem the moment that they want to. So they can now they believe that, and to the test that they've probably got it done, they can, but it's not guaranteed. It's a big risk to kill most of nature. The second thing, obviously, they're doing is setting aside sanctuaries all around the world. So there's a lot of sanctuaries. All the people involved in these sanctuaries, like Sylvia Earle, I think, the Leonardo DiCaprio one that is in the rainforest right now that he's been promoting. Richard Branson's got one, I think, on Madagascar Island, but it might be somewhere else. One of those islands. The Rotorua Bird Sanctuary Island here. So a lot of them are involved in it's kind of like Noah's Ark all around the world, seed banking and sanctuaries to species and certain ecosystems, and then poisoning and destroying the rest. So they've got the technology to remediate. There's also the issue of the singularity. Now, there's certain things about this I can't talk about, but what I can say is that people should read up on the singularity, Ray Kurzweil's singularity, and the Israel Innovation Project. Now, the singularity is part man, part machine. So they chip you, they implant you, or you have, I guess, you know, bots in your system that make you part man, part machine, artificial intelligence. It's the age of the singularity.
The chemtrails are working well to do that too, with all their little microfibers, their nanotechnology that they're already putting in subatomic nanoparticles into us. Yep. We're getting quite metallic in our bodies.
Metallic, yeah, and probably layers of bacteria on the skin. It's probably causing layers of bacteria on the skin.
Yeah. So it's
really
like
got to
more
detox
balanced
that shit
disease.
off.
So some of the symptoms that are being caused are like, some of the symptoms are like Morgellons disease. And
I haven't heard of that. What's Morgellons disease?
it's that the nanofibers that then bond into the human system, and people are picking out like fibers out of their skin when they get sores, and they're just picking out these fibers and they're putting them under microscopes, and they're like intelligence. They've got, you know, like a AI bio-intelligent life form to them. So they're changing our DNA and the structure of our bodies with the chemtrails and you know, those of us who've studied the chemtrails, we know that it's got barium and strontium and cadmium and also and live viruses and human red blood cells and other.
It's a worldwide. It's a chemical extermination program worldwide, and if they're not stopped by 2030, millions would have died. They're poisoning our oceans right now. They're poisoning our livestock. We will starve to death. This is communism. You know, we're about to know the age of starvation. People haven't grasped this yet. They're doing it now. They're completely criminal. But the scary thing, is that the AI, the singularity, when, you know, men chipped into machines, and it's a single steel mind. It's like a big, imagine a massive giant steel wall, and they're all a part of it, all these different individuals, because they're chipped into it. And they have a artificial intelligence, but they're void of humanity. So they're not human. They're part human, part machine. And I think it's got. I don't have access to the Israel Innovation Agreement, but I definitely think that they've got the ability to through that they're chipping people, and it regenerates the cells, so they promise immortality.
This is AI. This is like that human machine transhumanism agenda, that, you know, like that Terminator type, you know, part human, part machine AI program that they're working on at the moment.
And then they think, because we're void of spirituality now, we've lost that energetic transcendency. We've lost, a lot of people have lost it, that connection with spirit and the spirit of nature and God and goddess and that beauty of that frequency of love. We've lost the frequency of love. So these guys have chosen the frequency or technology and artificial intelligence as the purpose, as the highest goal attainable. That's what they desire, and that's what they're willing to sacrifice everyone else to be part of, as, you know, the chosen ones, I guess. But they, you know, the point of life, the experience on earth is love. So they've completely missed the point. You know, they've got it wrong. And as in their state, they won't experience that. And
the whole singularity, through my journeying with different shamanic medicines throughout the Amazon, the singularity on a spiritual perspective is that oneness with all, with the greater all. And they're somehow hacking this singularity that comes with organic ascension into this hive mind that they're creating, like a matrix mind. And that's really quite disturbing.
Exactly. So they're artificially creating it. So I really see it as, you know, good versus evil, dark versus light. Or I don't like saying dark versus light. You know, it's heaven versus hell, or it's frequency. It's the kingdom of nature and the spirit of nature versus spirit of evil and spirit of the devil. Because you know, what they're doing is pure evil. You know, you mass torture. They're mass torture, poisoning. There's no question. You know, even the people who have been misled on the science that water is consciousness and water restructures to the frequency of the poisonous chemical to become an enhanced version of that. And that's the absolute world-leading science by Luc Montagnier, the French Nobel Peace Prize, Nobel laureate he discovered the AIDS virus. And, you know, people through the centuries had this knowledge. Water is consciousness, water is life. It's our energetic system. It's our electricity for our body, effectively. And they say it just disappears in water.
The Japanese doctor Masaru Emoto also wrote a beautiful body of knowledge about the, you know, consciousness in water and the intention that we put in the water. So if we get reverse osmosis filters, it's just a membrane, but the energetic imprint that such hatred towards the organic ascension of humanity and the reproductivity, you know, that's a hatred that I believe still permeates even the strongest filters. We need to.
Yeah, you have to pray and bless and meditate on your water these days, I think, to get it back. And I mean, no one's got the time or the mind to do that. We've lost that connection. I mean, there was a really long period in my life where I would meditate for 40 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes at night. And I spent a lot of time in Paris and cathedrals. I'd go into cathedrals all the time and sit there and meditate for 40 minutes. And it was like pure vision journey, you know, like it was just incredible. And I don't have the, you know, I'm constantly writing legal arguments at the moment, so such a lot of work. So I don't have the time, but the right state to be in is when you are meditating and in prayer and in connection all the time. And it's an incredible state. It's, you know, it's so exciting because you have constant visions and pure information coming to you, streaming to you. And you're blissful, you're absolutely blissful all the time. But most people are completely not even aware of that connection that they can have, you know. And it's pure intelligence. It's much more pure, heightened intelligence than you'd ever get out of AI technology, which is what these people are chipped into. But that's real. That's now. Ray Kurzweil did it. And you know, when you've got Noam Chomsky saying it's not, then that's a good sign that it is. You know, he's like the credible controlled opposition, I think. That is a real problem here. There's a huge amount of controlled opposition all around the world. When I did rainforest cases or coral reef cases, they had a sophisticated network of controlled opposition people set up because it was $1 billion development in each case. And you know, in the case of, for example, Shell drilling the Arctic, 2 months after the International Criminal Court accepted my argument against them for drilling the Arctic, their directors walked away. And I don't believe that was because Greenpeace were protesting by hanging off bridges, or they don't give a shit what people think, you know. It was they were criminally liable for the crime, and they cut their losses and walked away because they were personally, individually liable, the directors. But in each of these cases, there's networks like activists, journalists, there's people set up around to control the narrative. And in New Zealand, with the poisoning, part of the problem is not only the mainstream media spread the propaganda that the water is safe after 1080 poisoning and that we're just killing a few possums with enough quantities to kill hundreds of millions of people, restructuring our water and poisoning our food system. So they control the narrative away from that. But we've also got a lot of activists, people who control pages, 1080 pages and things like that. And a lot of people on TripAdvisor, for example, saying it's perfectly safe to come to New Zealand and drink 1080 poisoned water out of the stream, perfectly safe. It's a complete lie. There's so many profiles of these people giving that advice, all fake. And then anyone who does genuine opposition is completely harassed. Like, you know, that's why I'm really careful with my social media, because when I first began it, such harassment coming from so many people that you just get, you know, and they're obviously hired to knock the credibility of your work, and as much as possible with lies and deceit and nastiness. And so there's this massive controlled opposition to attack genuine opposition, and also to mislead the dialogue so that people were just concentrating on, like, honestly, when I came back here and I first got involved in this and I realized what was happening, I was like, this is an attack on the primary industry. They're establishing a fraudulent narrative to give cover to a mass poisoning that they're planning, calling it M. bovis, and they're preparing it. There's no sick stock yet. They've done this promotion right around the country. Everyone thinks there's this M. bovis disease with just a couple of farms with 1080 poisoning. And then now they've mass poisoned. That disease is going to bioaccumulate in animals. It's not a disease, 1080 poisoning. They're going to call it this disease. It's the deliberate poisoning to divest farmers. But people believe it. But then you've got all the other people on. That's what I was going to say. When I came back, everyone was like, counting how many kias were dead, or how many kiwis were dead, or how many possums were dead. Everyone was just counting dead wildlife. And I'm like, no, this is poisoning our water that runs into our town and city water supply. It's poisoning our water that runs into our agriculture. The bees are going to pollinate on these dead animals, I didn't actually, that's a lie. The bees, I was saying bees are going to pollinate on the poison pellets. And then when the animals started dying after this round of poisoning, which I held off arguably till 2 days after my High Court hearing in August. So most of the poisonings happened in the last month, and we've got photos of bees pollinating on the dead festering blood, spilling out the nostrils of the poisoned cows, and then pollinating our foods with that. So I was just like, this is poisoning our entire water and food system. And then I looked at the quantities of poison that they plan to use, and I was like, well, this is a chemical extermination. This is a genocide. You can't call it anything else, not when you've been systematically poisoning. But now the difference is, everyone's always like, this started before Labour, before Ardern. Ardern has industrialised the budget. There's never been a bigger budget, $436 million to run these programs and these frauds. And the budget next year will be bigger, and the budget after that will be bigger. And her forecast of deadly diseases will be absolutely true, because it's chemically inflicted. And it's very difficult for people to see that. I remember talking to farmers who were affected by this fake narrative when it first happened, in one farmer in the South Island, and they started promoting this outbreak in tidy parcels of 2, Lower North Island, Middle North Island, Upper North Island, Northland. No disease outbreaks like it's delivered by the postman, like it's a joke. And then they'd say to neighbours, oh no, there's no chance, you can't get affected nose to nose, animals nose to nose through the fence. And it's like, well, how would you know that unless you were testing for it, which you refused to test for it? And the reason you refuse to test for it, neighbours getting affected, is because you know that you're spreading it by poison, And they left the Cook Strait open. So they said the outbreak was happening down the South Island because 2 farms were poisoned. None of the rest of the farms had sick stock. They left the Cook Strait open. Well, if you had a real disease outbreak in the South Island, you'd shut the Cook Strait so that the stock couldn't travel up to the North Island, right? They would identify farms that they thought may have a problem with the disease, and then they'd leave them free to send stock all around the country for 3 months or 4 months before they quarantined the farms. So they let the stock move so that they could build the narrative that the stock had moved. And then they were people that they were accusing of having the antibodies that might become the poison, but there was no test for it. They let them send sperm to the bull bank, sperm bank for the bulls, and so that spread around the country. So they deliberately created all these different avenues to spread the narrative of this disease this season, when the bioaccumulation of the mass poisoning they've inflicted starts to cause the symptoms in the stock that they then promote as M. bovis, but it's actually 1080 poisoning, and it's deliberately inflicted. And then they've got a civil military raised through MPI. It's like a Gestapo force, effectively, because they go around the farmers. They've got at least 200 farmers under surveillance. They threaten the farmers with $250,000 fines or arrest unless they just get out of the way and let them force the slaughter of their 50-year breeding herds, like really invaluable stock, the life and heart of the soul of the farmer and the farm. And last year, because of nothing, perfectly healthy stock, and they were slaughtering thousands of animals. And it's not even how much they slaughter. I mean, farmers kill animals all the time, but it's because they were killing the breeding stock, so they were killing the farmer. And now the poison is going to accumulate that they've been attacking with in the last month, and we're going to have carnage. But it's done now, I mean, it's so gutting that not only was I in the New Zealand courts to stop it, and it could have been stopped if I don't know, again, if the courts are, just unable to see it, or completely corrupt, or unable to stop it because of the nature of the people involved and their power and money, when this is the Queen. If you connect the dots on these narratives, if you look, it's who was promoting one world government earlier this year, Bill Gates and the Pope, coming out and saying we need one world government. They're going to get one world government by weaponized weather and water, and the countries will be demoralized. We'll be quarantined to the city. They're selling off all of our. I've got another legal case against I always say Pol Pot, but Mayor Gough and Auckland Council at the moment, they're selling off 331 land plots all across our city that are publicly owned, all of our public land of greater size than 2,500 square metres or more. And they're converting it all to private developments for housing. Now, for a start, it's a grand theft because we don't know what price they're selling it for. So in 2013, it was worth 5.4 billion at market, and that's capital value. So market value would easily be 15 to 30 billion, and they could sell that for 50 cents, and we wouldn't know because they don't disclose the prices. And they're selling all of it. So that's all our open space, all our parks, all our car parks, all our services and infrastructure that we use from land assets. It's being annihilated right now. It's a grand theft. So, and all of the deals with property developers are predetermined with a unitary plan. All the public don't know about it. So suddenly, one by one, their assets are being picked off in their community, and the communities are fighting for it. But they're helpless to stop it because the majority vote with Mayor Gough and the council just push it through. So they can't stop it. And all of it's been built into housing. Now, there is no demand for the houses. The apartments are not pre-selling, they're not selling, so there's no demand for it, but they're creating this housing crisis demand because they've been evicting all the state housing tenants through this false methamphetamine contamination crisis that was just a big lie. Right. And I don't know if you're following me on this, but basically they're doing this one scam on one hand to divest all the state housing tenants, so there's a whole lot of homelessness, so that they can develop their land because it's worth a fortune, the state housing land. They've done a resource consent to demolition all of the state houses, and they haven't gone through any of the consent processes, which is you have to consult with those affected. And the reason is because if everyone knew that they had a demolition consent for all the state houses, there'd be an uproar, But they're creating the housing crisis through the poor, and then they're selling off all our public land to build this irrational level of houses that there is no demand for because they're not pre-selling. Half of the pre-sales are failing at the moment, but they're doing it because they're building Agenda 21 precincts, smart cities, and they're increasing the toxicity of our countryside. We'll all be forcibly displaced to the city, and they're preparing the housing for it. It's really, really obvious, but it's easy for me to see because I've worked across the world on this crime at the ground level up for so long that it's just like it's 10 years of building blocks, but I guess for a lot of other people it's like unbelievable. Yeah.
And what astounds me is if you're depopulating the country, why are you creating all this housing? Who are you going to put there if you've got 100 million people that you can kill in a small country that's only got 4.8 million? I mean, why have all this extra housing? Is it just to basically shuffle and corral everybody into the cities and to kill agriculture, to kill the economy?
Well, I think it's a few things. Like, okay, they're divesting farmers. No way, small farmers are not going to survive the state forced slaughter of their poison stock and the increasing toxicity of their water. If you don't have water, your cities and towns, everything dies. You need clean water, drinking water, and they're poisoning it all, irrecoverably poisoning it all. So, well, I'm sure they have the technology to recover it, but okay, so they're poisoning it all, and so the farmers are going to be divested, and the banks are going to, I've seen it happen in the dairy farming industry, the banks are just going to tighten the noose and sell them up, and so the town and city water supplies are being affected. People, in Taupo especially, my young niece had a stroke. She's 24. She's got a young child who's 1. Just last year, she just suddenly had a stroke out of nowhere, perfectly healthy. And she lives in Taupo, and they've been spraying poison in the Tongariro that runs down, the rivers and streams run down into Lake Taupo. Lake Taupo's now got a toxic algae. You can't swim in it. I grew up swimming in Lake Taupo, so it must be devastating for them not to be able to swim in that lake. And that toxic algae, they have health meetings. They're DHB gives meetings saying that toxic algae leads to respiratory problems, so that people will be breathing the algae through the air and it will give them respiratory problems. Well, what they forgot to say is 1080 poisoning also gives strokes and heart attacks, and it's giving heart problems and brain problems and depression. There are people who will say, when I'm in Taupo, I feel completely depressed and I leave and I'm fine within a week. And so that toxic algae is the environmental bioaccumulation of this toxicity, but then that spreads by air drift, and no doubt the underground water system is poisoned as well. But the water that streams and rivers they were poisoning runs right into the dam that supplies their town water supply. But so you've got a situation in Taupo where already the environment is so toxified, it's dangerous to live there. More and more young people will have strokes, heart attacks, depression, and develop cancers and all that sort of stuff as they breathe in the air drift of the toxic algae. But at some stage, people will work it out. There are farmers who have literally handed their keys to the bank or to their friends and to look after their stock and moved out of the area that's poisoned because their families are sick. So people know what's happening. Some people go to extreme lengths to, like me, to drink imported water and, be really careful. I don't eat meat, won't eat. I really barely ever ate meat anyway, but I won't eat it because young people are eating sandwiches and having heart attacks because they're eating beef. There's lambs or beef that are poisoned, and the farmers will see them a bit sick and they'll send them off to the works and they'll be packaged up into a whole lot of different package. There was one affidavit that I was getting where 331 lamb packages all had apportioned 33 sick stock through it, and that meat was sent off and people ate it, and some of those people would have died immediately from a heart attack, but of course no way to test, no way to know, and that's released right through our ecosystem now. It's just so incredibly dangerous.
And the seafood, because of what you said about the lakes and the rivers and the streams going into the sea, that New Zealand, their seafood industry is also compromised.
Absolutely, they're spreading masses of brodifacoum. So the poisoning rates I gave you before, that hasn't totaled the brodifacoum poisoning they're spreading, and that makes you hemorrhage to death. It's as torturous and awful as 1080, but it's a different way of dying. So 1080 is more like dying of an electric shock, like constantly electrocution, like agonizing electrocution, and brodifacoum is like hemorrhaging, you're bleeding to death internally, and respiratory problems, and you feel yourself dying. It's terrible what they're doing to all the wildlife. I do, honestly, if you tortured one animal like this, you'd be in prison. Really, it's so disgusting. Ardern is mass torturing all animals. It's all her subordinates as well: Osprey, DOC, medical officers of health, Director General of Health, IRMA, the environmental agency that have let it happen. It's right across the board, but I mean, she's the leader of it right now at the higher doses. But the brodifacoum poisoning is terrifying. That's going around all our ocean ecosystems, all our islands and stuff, and they're spraying it across a lot of the rivers and streams that run out into the ocean. Our ocean life is being absolutely toxified. Again, there was a guy who ate sushi the other day and broke out in a skin-eating disease. Again, the deadly diseases that Ardern seems to know are coming, which I also know are coming because I've looked at how much poison she's spreading, and so there's no question it's terrifying. You won't be able to eat your freshwater trout, whiteback. You won't be able to eat your the ocean seafood. Don't eat the meat because all of the stock are drinking this poison or potentially eating the poison baits in sublethal doses, and their meat is poisoned. And when there are people who hunt and get the animal and cut open an area they wouldn't normally cut open, and they find like a bait there. They find the green poisoned bait in the animal not yet decomposed. So again, a lot of farmers will not know what's happened, but they'll get sick stock and they'll send them off to the works, and we will eat that. So I wouldn't eat meat. I wouldn't eat any foods pollinated by bees, because the bees have been, the strawberries and all the best foods are pollinated by bees, but they fester. They pollinate off the festering dead blood of the poisoned animals they are left lying strewn right through our bush. Every single kind of animal and microorganism and insect dead right through the secondary poisoning is terrible. There's a calculation that if there's 200 possums that are poisoned and they all end up in the stream because they're going for water for some relief, and then that becomes 1 ton of poison in its own right. So you've dropped all the poison, and then the 1 ton of poison of the possums is then that's fed off by all the like the eels and the birds and the rats, and so the secondary poisoning, what you drop in terms of kgs of poison, it just it escalates due to the secondary poisoning to an uncontrollable amount of poison spreading.
And like birds of prey, like you guys would have birds of prey as well, like eagles and things like that with you, and if they're picking up mice or rats that are picking up the pellets, they're getting injured and
well, I think you really have that problem. We don't really so much have that, but we do have seagulls and hawks and stuff, but you have that problem in Australia, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, and because it takes so long for the animals to die as well. So, you know, with the bees, they can pollinate off the animal, go and pollinate food, and then they'll die. You know, they can do their job first. So none of the food pollinated by bees, none of the freshwater food. A lot of Māori eat watercress and puha here. They take it out of the Hunua ranges and truckloads into South Auckland, and people eat it, and then they've got the highest rate of breast cancers, you know, young mums with breast cancer, and they've got, you know, it's terrible. It's disproportionately targeting the people who eat food from the rivers and forest ecosystem. You've got obviously mosquitoes are a huge problem. There's going to be Lyme disease and all sorts of blood poisoning diseases and that sort of thing spread by mosquitoes because they fest all the dead animals lying in the streams. There's a huge problem in the Hawke's Bay last year, I think, where a lot of people were killed and really, really sick because the dead animals from 1080 poisoning really far upstream from where their water supply was, really, really far. But it's so toxic. This is one of the most toxic poisons in the world. It travels, you know, just a joke. They say that they're dropping it not closer than 2 kilometres away from the reservoirs with the water supplies. But I mean, water travels. I mean, how do people not think this through? Water upstream, 2 kilometres, travels downstream. And people talk about, like there was an article in the paper today of this woman saying, I could eat it, drink it from a 1080 poison stream. But, you know, this is about the... you only need a sublethal dose to start killing some of your cells and mutating your cells and causing you cancer in one area, you know? Your body does the rest of the work. You only need enough of those metabolized fluorocitrate molecules to interrupt your Krebs cycle, poison some of your cells, and enough of it to not be metabolized, and you mutate cells and the body just triggers, you know? It's an on-flow effect. It's terrible. You've got your Ardern is giving interviews saying it's safe to drink from 1080 poison streams. And
I'd like to see her drink directly from a 1080 stream, like actually dip a glass of water in and actually drink out of it on camera and see how she goes.
Well, once she's arrested and spends the rest of her life in prison for inflicting these systematic chemical weapons attacks against our population, I don't think there'll be a need, you know.
There is no immunity for these people, is there? I mean, like from what you're saying, it's a cut and dry case, and it has to be heard in an international court, you know, for this to be overruled, campaign to be overruled.
You know, when I first started doing my case a year ago against the mayor and the mass divestment of public land that broke all the laws in the book, like, I mean, it's just so overtly corrupt and, you know, in many situations criminal. And I kept saying, why are they so confident? They have no expectation that the court will stop them from committing this crime. They honestly think, they act like there is no chance of justice and there's no democracy. And, you know, I went through the court process and I slowly started to agree with them. I thought, well, doesn't look like there's any justice occurring here. Like the rulings of the court are not, they're like, it's the appearance of justice. So I don't know the full story of the court situation about who's holding the power here and who's aware of what they'll lose. You know, at the end of the day, for example, if all of this tracks back into the cabal of the Pope, the Queen, Branson, you know, new money, old money, and a certain clique at the top, then, for example, if you're a judge, the Queen can get rid of you. She's the only one in the country who can fire you, right? So the Queen can, you know, if you rule against what you know is her program, you're out of the job. So is that in play? I don't know exactly the story, but certainly I've had, you know, many judges now and across these cases, and no justice yet in the New Zealand system, but it's with the Court of Appeal at the moment. It's with criminal claim and civil claim is with them. It's a new judge, and you never know. You have to hold on to the fact that this has also been a journey for everyone. I've argued, like, viciously, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure I'm a little bit more of a troublemaker than most when it comes to being honest about what's happening. So I think that would be definitely, if people weren't aware, they'll be thinking enough to the point where they're getting it now. And let's see what happens in the next week in October. Let's see what the court decide on in the Court of Appeal on my claim. So yeah, there's always chance that justice is evolving because people are starting to process what could be happening here, this giant crime of chemically inflicting climate change so that you can structurally reform the country, introduce zero carbon legislation, and effectively establish the entire economy to run on an international tax and trade mechanism that can, through many disasters and poisoning and divestment and demoralization of the population, can actually transition our sovereignty to the UN by 2030. So, and that is the plan, it's sure. So people maybe they just needed to process that, and they're getting there. I don't know. But on July 23rd, the International Criminal Court accepted the case for review. Now, here's the thing, like, it's also a global crime. So they are in a position where if they're going to stop this for the world, they are looking at it in context of a global crime, not just what's been inflicted on New Zealand right now. So because this has been inflicted on Australia, New Zealand, Australia and Israel have imported 1080 for years from Tull in Alabama. And we all have the highest rate of skin cancer. That's another thing, because the chemicals are absorbed through your skin in the shower. So if it's in the water supply of New Zealand, Australia and Israel, and then we're the three countries in the world who have the highest skin cancer rate, when our skin is absorbing that every time we have a shower, you know, that's a unmistakable connection, you know. Mm-hmm. And so the ICC, I've put 80 updates to them. Much of it is focused on the process of the New Zealand court system process, because if they are unable or unwilling to investigate or prosecute, then the ICC take jurisdiction. So there's that's against the nationals. But, you know, unless there's a coup, there's no way that a New Zealand court can rule against the Queen unless all the judges decide to do it together and take her out. And she has been poisoning us since 1953. There's no doubt about that. She came to reign and that poison started dropping. So it's an unmistakable connection and timing that I just can't get. No one will ever convince me that she hasn't been doing it. And I'm sure there's people who know that she's been doing it. And then what we need now is the ICC to come to fruition and prosecute the global case, you know. I don't know, sometimes I feel quite emotional. I write them quite emotional little notes because I'm just like, you know, when you're trying to stop mass poisoning of, you know, different areas in your country, and then you're unable to stop it because your national system is so corrupted, and probably a whole lot of, you know, people who just don't understand it as well. It's heartbreaking. How many animals have been mass tortured to death across this country in the last month? And Ardern's sitting there doing interviews in America and parading around with her giant smile while she's giant-sized killing everyone. It's just disgusting, you know? You kind of wonder what kind of reality we live in.
And I wonder why New Zealand continues to be part of the UN. I mean, I just look at, I want every Australian particularly to really have a bit of a think about, you know, the relationship that we've had to New Zealand. If you're patriots, right, remember the Anzac spirit. Remember the Anzac spirit. We fought beside each other. We died beside each other. You know, there's a kinship that goes beyond that. There's the intermarriages of the Indigenous Australians with the native Maori people, and there's families that are joined here. So both from pre and post settlement, we have our destinies are intertwined. And
Yeah.
and we're just across the ditch. The Anzac spirit should be living on, and every Australian, being that the mainland is, it has got a bigger population, should be getting on this, because the seafood that's been poisoned on the west coast is drifting across to the east coast of Australia. So, Sydney mussels and, abalone from around here, the surf coast. It's all affected. It's absolutely all affected, and we can't think just because they're being poisoned over there that it's not going to affect us over here, because you just have to look at the cloud cycle, the clouds and the tides and the water cycle, and just know that we're not immune to it, and we're certainly not protected by geography, because it's,
well, I mean, if you look at your pest control system, what they call pest control, we're the pests. We're the ones who most suffer the poison effects. And if you look at that, you'll find that it is ramping up just like New Zealand. You guys are being poisoned just as much. But the beauty of the ICC case is that the International Criminal Court look at it arguably from a global perspective, because it's a global crime, and the people at the head of this are international people. But many are from signatory states, so they are liable under the Rome Statute. And the Rome Statute, you asked about immunity, and the national courts have definitely been shielding those who are criminally liable from liability, and thus granting immunity. But the International Criminal Court does not give immunity for head of state, prime minister, governor generals. They are all criminally liable and able to be prosecuted under the Rome Statute. So we've got to pray that comes to force, because again, I wonder why they were so confident, knowing that the International Criminal Court had accepted the case for review, how they could be so confident to continue the crime for the last month. Like that, they must think that they can control justice at the ICC to not come to effect, or they can't believe it will come to effect, so they're just being arrogant and getting on with it because they literally think they can get away with it. Like, they literally believe their own propaganda, some of these people, that they're spreading enough poison to kill millions of people in our water, but that once you put the chemical in, it evaporates. Like, the chemical's gone within 4 days, metabolized. It is metabolized, but it metabolizes into the fluorocitrate molecule, which is the deadly part of the that's what kills the cells. That's what tortures animals and humans to death. So the 1080 itself is gone, so you can't test for that, but the metabolized degradation product is there, and that's the killer. And that's what they're not telling people. And, I've been very heavily out campaigning, and Ardern started doing media interviews saying that I was lying. Well, not me, but saying, people are putting things online, and it's just not true about 1080 poisoning the water. And, that was brilliant, because I sent that to every single diplomat at the UN, and I sent it to the ICC, and it evidenced categorically that she's running propaganda campaigns to mislead people on the world's greatest chemical. But sometimes I wonder if she's on some sort of chipped program and like a drone, because it's just ridiculous to say what she's been saying.
It just astounds. What's she going to drink? What's she going to eat? Like, she has to live in New Zealand as well with her family. And what does she think she's going to eat and drink?
Well, for a start, if if you know where your food's sourced, and you only drink imported bottled water and things like that, then you can survive. There's certain water filters, like the Nordic water filter, which is industrialized, which completely restructures the water. So I noticed that certain people involved maybe had the Nordic system, so I would trust that system. It's like an industrialized water filter system, but it restructures the entire frequency of the water, I guess. But also, if she is in the artificial AI singularity, and, I do have a question about her that I want answered, and that is, she was in a mental institution 2 years ago for some time, and what was she doing in a mental institution? And Barry Soper wrote about this in the New Zealand Herald. He's one of our most famed, admired journalists, so, he wrote about it. It's right. And he wouldn't have written about it unless it was absolute truth. So we know she was there. Well, these politicians who disappear into hospital and have these operations, honestly, I'm so suspicious about them being chipped into the singularity, because if they are including the if they're part artificial intelligence now, that can heal the cells. They can live in a poisoned ecosystem and survive. So those part of the singularity nature cannot survive and humans cannot survive, but if you're chipped into the singularity, you can. Now you've got to think about it. Fast forward to 2030, you want global government, you've poisoned the ecosystems to death. A lot of people have starved, died of diseases, died of natural disasters, and then you want to force them into being chipped, and they don't want to be chipped. Well, how do you get that to happen? The only way they can physically survive is if they are chipped into the artificial intelligence network at a certain level, lower level, slave level, but that's the only way they can physically survive in an incredibly toxified ecosystem. You get them chipped in, and then you start remediating the ecosystem. And I swear to God, that's the plan, because they're doing it. It's happening. There's no question. The chemicals have already been spread. Deadly diseases are going to happen. The agriculture industry is going to be divested. Everything's toxified. You don't know what to eat. Organic fruit on the trees, but how much of that's sprayed with pesticides and chemicals. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. The entire food system is toxified now, and we can't survive it. If she continues, if she's not arrested and tried for this crime, if she continues, it keeps power and continues spreading these chemicals, we're poisoned to death. And just as I said, anyone chipped into the singularity, their cells will regenerate. They have technologies to do that outside of the singularity, just through injection cell regeneration. At the moment, the Woman of the Year in Singapore a few years back developed that technology and was already using it. They already had it. A lot of these people in this group, from the Club of Rome to the Giving Pledge kind of people, they have access to all these technologies. They can completely survive this. It's all planned, So we are just, humanity we're either going to wake up and realize that we're under siege, and my ICC arguments, my legal arguments can stop it. And I've worked 7 years, 10 years on this. 3 of those were transitioning agriculture, but the ICC has the power to stop all of this and take out all these people. So we've got to hope to God that they're on my side and not their side, our side.
Let's hope they're on the side of humans and nature and wildlife and agriculture and farmers and industry, primary industry. I mean, this is being paid for. Yeah, this is being paid for by New Zealand taxpayers. So they're actually effectively, any taxes they pay, they're paying for their own genocidal program. They're paying for the death of the family and the sickness and the suffering of millions of, countless sentient beings. They're paying for
But they haven't connected the dots yet, right? So someone they know will get a quick 6-week cancer and die, and they'll think, bad luck, They won't realize, he ate a sandwich poisoned with 1080, or she's been drinking tap water, and so she got breast cancer. She's been eating lots of puha that was in a 1080 poison stream, so she got breast cancer after she just had a child, and she's dying of cancer within 6 weeks of having a baby. And so they haven't connected the dots yet. Motor neuron disease, that he lived next to a 1080 drop. They haven't connected the dots. And when they connect the dots and they realize that all this devastation and loss, this human suffering and human health devastation is directly connected to this poisoning, when they realize that, wow, this country is going to grieve because people are increasingly losing their loved ones. And after this new dose of poisoning, totally contaminating our food system, we are in for some scary, scary, agonizing suffering,
So sad.
I just put the website up today because there's that product that I found that helped me with 1080 poisoning, and arguably it was 1080 poisoning. It was poisoning, but I had huge difficulty breathing at the time. That's another symptom of 1080 poisoning. So that's what made me realize when I started reading all the affidavits on my case that the poisoning I'd had last year was actually probably 1080 poisoning, because when it had happened, I'd thought the breathing thing was completely different to the poisoning. but it's the same. It happened at the same time, so that's what triggered me to thinking it was 1080. But that plus the cream that I was using, on the skin cancers and things like that, it's incredibly effective. And so they say that 1080 is without an antidote, but the genius is that if we have an antidote, and definitely for me this worked, then we've got a way to remedy ourselves relatively quickly from their attacks.
Let's talk about this. It's the herbal mix. So how do people get it? What's in it?
Well, it's a mix of native botanicals. They're all listed on the website. There's 2 products. There's a much more extensive product range, but they're mainly used on really, really high value animals at the moment. So, but these 2 products have crossed over into human use. So
if people want to look it up, it's theherbalmix.com. So
yeah, the herbalist mix.
Oh, the herbalist
and
mix.
Yeah, all the active ingredients are listed. The tonic tastes like you're drinking Vegemite or molasses, so it's not like super. I like it. I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't like it, but you just have it teaspoon at a time. Like especially if you've got really burning gut problems, if you've got serious gut problems. Mine was unbearable. I'd be awake all night long, couldn't sleep, such agony in the gut. And it completely healed it within a week. And then it kind of came back a few times, but it got rid of it. So that was the tonic. And you can feel it oxygenate your cells when you drink it. It's just amazing. And I needed quite a lot of it. And it's not cheap because all of these botanicals are really expensive to get now and really hard to get now. Like some of them, like the vitamin C, it's got a more technical name on the product, but really, really hard to get now. Like they are outlawing access to these products, these healing products, and but these are still available. And then the cream, as I said, it's been what's helped me survive the EMF attacks, and just really like no cream you'd ever had. Like when you've got muscle or pain or like. It's working. There's an Israeli doctor who's using it on melanomas for his skin cancer patients, and it's just working like a miracle. So,
and is that a herbalist mix as well? Yep.
Those are the only 2 products on there. Yeah, those are the 2 really powerful products that I think a lot of people probably need right now. I don't produce it. It's not me who I found it because it was relevant to an affidavit on my case, and because it had been developed through dealing with the effects of 1080 poisoning. It was specifically developed to combat it, and because it's been going on for so many years. But that's the difference now. It's been going on for so many years, but nowhere near at the intensity and level of dosage that Ardern is inflicting in this new budget. It's a kill program now. It's been a moderate poisoning program until now, but now it's an extermination program at these new levels. It's like industrialized poisoning across our entire ecosystem. But yeah, those 2 products I couldn't have survived the last year if it wasn't for those 2 products. So it's like a miracle to find them because I really wouldn't have survived.
Wow, Miriam, you've been through so much, and your background. Just talking about your background. You're a lawyer by profession, or did you come into it through environmental activism?
Yeah, when I first got involved, it was through environmentalism. So I'm University of London Law School, but like for example, I'm not registered in New Zealand because you know what, I actually don't believe in the bar system, like the registration system. So to register in New Zealand, I would have to do like formal pay. I'd have to do New Zealand papers here and that sort of thing. But all of the human rights lawyers in New Zealand, they often get massive fines and get disbarred. So I'm not into registration, but what I've focused on is interpreting the Rome Statute. So I've been internationally based interpreting the Rome Statute against environmental destruction for the last 7 years. So I've got 7 cases with the International Criminal Court registered and under review, and it's a world first. I was the first to pioneer the Rome Statute against environmental destruction. But that came about because I was I was in the rainforest looking at how we can stop the industrial destruction, because so many of these developments happen and there's no way to oppose them under national law. So they've restructured the law so that the industrialists can't be held accountable really for their environmental destruction, which leads to human destruction. So I read all the international law possible and realized that through the ICC, the definition of crimes against humanity and in some instances genocide were relevant to this industrialist contamination and now deliberate chemical extermination of populations. So what I then said is, so I'd get the ICC to accept the case, and then I'd set about getting barristers or legal groups to start working on the cases with me to expand the teams. So, you know, I've got a case that got accepted in 2015 to defend the Great Barrier Reef from the ICC. And I signed the Environmental Defenders Office up to work on it. But right now I need financing to give them money so that they continue. But that's prepared. And so I guess because I really focused on this for the last 7 years, this legal argument at the ICC. So I guess I would say that I was like a legal intellectual, and then persuading barristers and lawyers around the world to understand my legal argument and to agree to work on the case, which I became quite successful at doing. But it's very slow to progress that because we're not financed and most of them need to get paid. So I've got kind of work in progresses happening all around the world on these cases. And then, as I said, I'm not registered in New Zealand, but I'm litigating in person in the court anyway. Because I can, so as long as you're not representing someone, you can. And so I'm in the court myself in the cases in New Zealand, but in the ICC cases, it's the prosecutor. You know, it's like a public prosecution for the public prosecutor for the world, and it's their internal team which run it. So, you know, I present the cases and update the cases constantly, and then it's got to be them that transition it to a pre-trial chamber investigation and actually prosecute the criminals.
So Miriam, I wanted to ask you, how can we help? Like you were talking about financing. Is there some way we can help, or that viewers can perhaps donate to help pay for these barristers? Because this is affecting everybody, and if somebody's got some disposable income, if we have a benevolent person that is able to help fund this campaign, it would save humanity and save the world, save the wildlife and future generations. So how can we help, and where can we donate to?
Well, actually, on the Herbalist mix, so I've done, with the producer, I've done an arrangement where you can actually go on there and you can donate. You can buy the product and you can donate to the legal actions, or you can go on my agency site, Sustainable Quality Purpose, and donate as well. I think that's got a bank account down at the bottom there, but of the page, so yeah, I'm pretty sure.
We'll include notes for this website, and also any donation portals.
Yeah.
We'll upload any article that's going to come out with this video.
Right. Yeah. In a perfect world, and I have been working towards this for a while. This ultimately I'd be in a small office with 10 or 20 lawyers, and we'd be progressing all these cases to compel the ICC to move faster on them, and also because I've developed the environmental defence argument of the Rome Statute across the world. Now we need to push one of these cases across the line, or in two of the cases, my climate change argument, which addresses the industrialists' liability for it, and for environmental destruction, because climate change is a very misused word, because with this chemical extermination program that's running now, they're artificially creating climate change, with chemicals. They're poisoning nature to death. They're creating the sixth extinction. Our species are dying off at a rate you can't believe, and it's because of this poison, and it's so obvious, but I don't know, they've managed to persuade the population. But you know what, when I first came back to New Zealand last year after 14 years abroad, I really didn't get it either. Like, I ran for politics last year, and that was, there's real political persecution going on in this country, serious harassment. If you're doing work like I'm doing, you're really, really targeted. It's like the mafia. But that aside, I knew of 1080, but I just kind of thought it was just isolated spots of the forest that were being poisoned, and you didn't really think of the whole forest or the water being poisoned. You thought just the pests being targeted with poison, and you didn't really think about how awful it is to mass torture animals like that, because you didn't think about the fact that all the animals were dying by over many, many hours of agonizing torture. They don't promote that. You just think, like they're dying of cyanide, where it's relatively quick, and you just don't get it. And it's only when you really get in, it's only when I realized that it was an attack on the agriculture industry, and I'd spent 3 years doing a massive development of that was funded by the ANZ for 120 million and Graham Hart of Rank Group for 50 million, and that in the end got sabotaged, I believe, by these people, because the international money got held up, and without the international money the rest of the deal didn't go through, even though I'd signed it all, contracted it all. And it was for a massive sustainable transition of the dairy industry, where farmers would have been much more sustainable system, regenerative farming, but producing pure products, so it would be for a premium, market premium, so it'd be worth it. And that got sabotaged, of course, because the people here are running an extermination program and divesting the dairy industry. They want Fonterra to be an international food company. They're exporting arguably poisoned product to the world. And it's part of this massive transition where Richard Branson's doing all this promotion saying it's the end of dairy, sheep and beef within 20 years. Yeah, because he knows it's been poisoned. How else can he confidently do a godlike prediction of the end of dairy, sheep and beef within 20 years unless they're deliberately divesting all the farmers, which they are. And so I realized, because I had this huge breadth of knowledge in transitioning the dairy industry and agriculture industry to pure food, I realized that the poisoning was attacking the dairy industry. And then I connected it, I guess, through that to poisoning the water system. Not only affects the livestock, it affects the people it's running. When I looked at what they were poisoning, where they were poisoning, I realized it was running into the town and water supplies. So they were poisoning the people. And then that led me back to, Agenda 21 and biodiversity plan, where New Zealand is effectively left as a bird sanctuary. And, all the other contexts. It's like linking lots and lots of dots, and realized what was happening. This is IMF, unimaginable IMF structural reform. And then, of course, I had my case to stop the mass divestment of public land in Auckland and connected that with the poisoning. And then it was like, well, that's why they're building all this irrational level of housing, because the whole countryside is going to be too toxic. People are going to have to move. And because they're getting sublethal doses of poisoning, which is triggering their own bodies to naturally break down in the form of deadly diseases, but some over time, everyone's not dropping dead tomorrow. This is going to be, fetal deformities or fetal malformities that lead to dying young, but maybe those fetuses that are affected won't break down for 10 or 20 years, So that's Peter Scanlon's work was great on that. Dr. Peter Scanlon with the World Health Organization. He was a New Zealand doctor. But okay, so there's all this sort of variations of what kind of sublethal dose of poisoning you'll get and how that will trigger your cells to die and mutate and trigger certain breakdowns of your own body. And with everyone's DNA and susceptibility, that'll be different for everyone. But that's going to happen over time, and the countryside will be increasingly toxified. They will get it to the point where they can quarantine it and force everyone to the city. And of course, conveniently, they're building all the housing for that right now. They're also, when the Green Party got in, they were obsessed with the first, this is our New Zealand government, Labour, New Zealand First and the Greens. They first got in, the first obsession was climate change visas. Climate change visas for people from the islands affected by storms. That was their number one agenda. Okay, they'd just been voted in by our country. You would think their first agenda would be something for our population's benefit. No, their first agenda was climate change visas and mass increase of poisoning. Okay, so that is weaponized water and climate change visas to save some of the people from the islands because of weaponized weather. created through the HARP stations and EMF technology and NASA's cloud creation that can create superstorms and floods and whatever. And so when their priorities were so clearly to do with weaponized water and weaponized weather right at the outset of this new government, I was like, well, that's another way the population is going to increase, because if they're trying to prepare climate change visas, and off the coast of New Zealand recently, they've been generating the biggest ever waves in the history of the world, and it's artificially generated. And on those waves, they know that they're generating them because they've got special testing technology out there monitoring it. So they're triggering them and testing them at the same time. That's not a coincidence. Same people. And, so they're gonna do tsunamis and floods and massive storms, and the people on those islands are really at risk, I think. And then you've got James Shaw working as fast as possible. The number one agenda in our new government was climate change visas, so that we've got somewhere to bring them. It's honestly, it's so obviously, yeah.
And like thinking of the dairy industry, for example, I mean, some of that milk is going to be turned into powdered baby milk formula, and then exported. And so people who are going to buy New Zealand dairy baby formula, wherever they're at, are also going to risk, harming their children. And
you look at the countries where we export our baby powder to, and they've got massively increasing rates of child cancer. And so when you have poison in a product like milk and you condense it down, then theoretically the powder that you've condensed it down to has a more intensified dose of the poison. And but here's the thing, I did a huge amount of work to help the New Zealand agriculture industry, and right now this case was about stopping the farmers getting poisoned. But the fact is, we have to own the fact that they have been poisoned. And so part of my legal argument to the court is that if we issued a second body corp, a reserve bank body corporate, so we have our reserve bank, our issuer of our currency, our amount of currency, has a single body corporate at the moment, but the Act doesn't preclude a second body corporate being appointed, and so that would give us back national control over our currency, or an interchangeable currency with the NZD. So my argument to the court is that we need to own this crime now. We need to appoint a second reserve body corporate under the Act, because we can, so we can finance ourselves and our farmers through the crisis, remediate the environment system within 10 years, so that we have safe food again within 10 years, manage the risk as much as possible until then, so that we minimize the amount of poisoning that people will consume, and take the crash now so we don't lose our country. Because if we don't accept this now, and we don't finance our way through the crash, we're going to be completely crashed and divested by 2030, with a massively poisoned and demoralized population. Even, it's so scary, even, like I said, the pharmaceutical companies are stocking up on the gastro drugs that will be one of the major symptoms of people with poisoning, is their gut will have unbearable pain and there'll be no solution. But also, all of the Evian and the imported water is being taken out of the stores. Normal people can't get imported water anymore. So they've removed all the poisoned water. A lot of the organics, like if you go shopping, you can't find organics. Like you shop online, it's really hard to find organics. You have to go all the organics are listed. If they exist in the store, they're listed at the back of the list, but a lot of the stores have got rid of their organics. Honestly, it's shocking. They are re-engineering the food system to do this, and I think the people in the supermarkets are in on it, because otherwise it wouldn't be so.
Why would they be removing, the pure water and the organic food? That's our safety. That's our safety.
The imported water. Yeah, no, they're removing it because they're poisoning you, because they're poisoning us. They are. I mean, there's no question what's happening here. And what else? When I first did my legal case on all the public land, part of it was they're selling all of our car parks right now because they're trying to divest independent mobility, because under the Agenda 21, we don't use cars anymore. We don't have independent mobility, trying to force everyone into public transport. But I thought some of the car sponsors would care about that, because if you don't have car parks, then people have no way to use their cars, so they'll stop buying cars, right? Well, none of the car manufacturers and none of the car big sellers were interested. And the reaction I got was really strange. It was the same as when I was sitting there thinking, why are the people who are illegally selling on our public land not afraid of the courts at all? Like they make it very clear they think no justice will occur. They're so confident they continue with the crime, steamroll the crime. And same thing with the car manufacturers and stuff. Why do they not care that all our car parks are being divested, and they know, and they're telling me the future is shared mobility? But if that's it, then their businesses are down the tube. Like, why do they not care about that? And these people are part of some sort of club that are agreeing to this crime. It's at the highest level, right across every aspect of our system. There are a whole lot of people who have agreed that depopulation is needed, and they're part of the crime.
What astounds me, Miriam, is, like, say if you own a soap powder factory or shampoo or something that the masses consume on a daily basis, or coffee or whatever. Surely by having a drastically reduced population, you're going to have a drastically reduced customer base, and it's going to drastically reduce everybody's profit margins because all the customers are dead or dying. Like, isn't that going to concern anybody? Or isn't it going to concern that they're not going to be selling cars or selling the petrol that goes in the cars because there's nobody left to drive them? I mean, what is going on here?
They've designed a new economy, they've agreed on it, and it's happening. They have agreed that our current system is wrong, that we are mass slaughtering, industrialists slaughtering animals, and all the I mean, let's get real. Call them slaves, call them plebs, call them commoners, call them what you like. That all the commoners, so these people of excellent wealth and success are up here, and they see everyone else, the employees, down there. And we're losing our democracy. We're losing all the civil rights that we fought so hard to get. And they honestly think that, I think that a lot of them think we're disgusting. A lot of them think that our system is disgusting. We don't deserve to eat meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I happen to agree with that. I think Sunday roast is a good balance, and you should kill it yourself if you want to eat meat. I'm not into industrialized slaughter of animals, definitely. But they think that's disgusting. They're ending it. They think mass consumerism. Why should we generate all this cheap plastic shit for all these poor people to buy and go shopping, and these fluoride dumbed down dimbos like buying all this stuff that they don't need? End of private property. Why should they have private property? Why should they own land when we can organize the distribution of food and that sort of thing much better if we control and own everything? Here's something freaky. Here's something really funny. And remember, because I've got all these ICC cases, I probably have eyes on me that most wouldn't. And I can tell you a few stories about that, but this is really funny. They I've forgotten it again. Honestly, my brain is like seriously suffering from a month's worth of EMF attacks. I'm like, damn it. I'll come back to it. It's a really funny point.
That's it.
They have agreed to completely change our system. This is unimaginable structural reform. It's agreed.
But no land ownership, no private vehicles, living in mass smart cities. That's absolutely horrendous for those of us who want to leave the cities and, go and live in a van or go and buy country property or go build an earthship. All these wonderful plans that so many of us have got. One day I'll get land and I'll build myself an earthship and I'll grow my own food and my own veggies and water the garden with pristine water. And these utopian ideals are all just being ripped out from under our feet at the moment.
Yeah, because most of us will be poisoned to death over the next 10 years and die of a deadly disease, as Jacinda Ardern's quite clearly promoted, a little bit early in my opinion. I think she as I said, let the cat out of the bag of her crime. But the whoever's left, we're only going to be there to function as an effective slave race. And I think in the end, with this sterility chemical in our water, the point is to render a future where the only people who have children are the ones who are given permission to have children, who earn it, or of the certain class system. And as many a person in history has said, it's easier to kill a million people than control a million people, and that's what they're doing. So we think that we have the rights to democracy. It's our government, it's our land, it's our system, everything is ours. We're the people, it's not that, and it's really not that. And it's really swiftly changing right now to the point where we, the people, have no rights, no property, no ownership of land, no businesses, no industry, no trade. And, they are fixing the system to their ideological view of the world. And they're doing it by poisoning everything so that they force the divestment to world government. It'll be the first ever world government achieved. And it's a bad plan. It's a terrible plan. Mass poisoning nature to death. They're going to torment all the souls left. All the animals left will be tormented like a living hell, feeling all nature and everyone die. That's what's going to happen. But they're doing it, And those superstorms that you see, the weather, the snow is often fake, like you can burn it and it won't melt like water, it disintegrates. The water is often smelling like chlorine or like pool water because it's been manufactured out of NASA's weather technology. And, they're setting off all these volcanoes around the world. They're disrupting the plates through the HAARP frequency technology. It's a giant crime. Most people cannot conceive of it, but it's happening, and it's so well organised, and they're so entrenched in power. And at certain levels of every part of the state and crown and government system here, they've agreed to it, and industry. Our supermarkets are clearly in on it. In my experience, the car industry have agreed. The future is shared mobility, and they're willing to give up their businesses. The heads of our dairy industry and agriculture industry, honestly, these are industrial leading groups who are in on it, who are perpetuating this fraud. I don't know what the answer is, unless, it's clearly completely criminal, so the ICC should stop it. Our national courts should stop it, arguably. Many in our national courts have agreed to it. Perhaps I'll get a judge who hasn't, and they'll rule on my side. But very difficult to stop now. Very, very difficult to stop. Because, as I said, anyone who obstructs them, quick death by 1080 poisoning in the right sandwich or water, death by EMF frequency attacks, which I've definitely been systematically attacked with for the last month and a half at great damage. And it's scary, So they have the capability to murder anyone who gets in their way. And as I said, there's ways to manage that and avoid it to a point, but at great personal sacrifice and cost. You're pretty much a prisoner. And so the only way, arguably, it's going to be fixed is if justice comes to force, because in my experience, no one has the courage to fight these guys,
And when is your next hearing? Isn't it October?
So I'm waiting on so I've got 2 injunction requests for the court. One is the civil claim, and the injunction, that's on appeal, so that the hearing is within 4 months of the appeal being granted, but there's just a few processes to go through at the moment. One of those processes is the injunction, and payment of security of costs it's like $6,600 for this case, this civil appeal. And so I've got to figure out how to pay that. And the injunction, the Crown have to answer by October 8th. But, as I've said publicly, a lot of the poisoning will continue before then. So, it's like the timing has been set in order to allow the crime to continue. And I've been trying to get undertakings. The Solicitor General refused an undertaking to stop it this morning, to await the judge's decision before continuing. So but then I've got another injunction application relevant to my criminal claim, and that is with the judge. That's with the judge today. no decisions come through. So that'll be, I don't know when the judge will make a decision on the criminal claim injunction, but he could give an outright order for that, or again, he could refuse it, or again, he could require the Crown to respond. I don't know, but, I've pushed for an outright order because there's no way chemical attacks should continue at this level with these claims before the court. At any time, the ICC can come to force, and as I said, the hearing for the Court of Appeal will be within 3.5 months from now, before then. But I ideally hope that fairly soon an order is given to stop this, because it's just clearly a criminal act, and
Really?
it's just unbelievable to me that the crime's been allowed to continue. But what it does do is it confirms exactly who belongs in prison for the rest of their life because of what they've done in the last month. Speaking
of who belongs in prison, have you looked at commercial liens to sue them personally with their personal assets, so that this hurts these perpetrators directly with their personal assets and even their spouse's assets?
Oh, that's what's absolutely wonderful about the International Criminal Court and the Rome Statute. It is against them personally, and they can be fully divested financially. They can be ordered, full financial forfeiture can be ordered for them, so they lose all their money. Any profit, any money to do with the crime or them personally can be seized. They could lose legacy wealth. The richest families in the world could have all their money seized from this, and all their power. The royal family could have all their money frozen and seized. The Pope could too, the church. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's possible. And so they lose all their money and they lose their personal freedom. This is what is beautiful about the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court, is that individual decision makers are liable, and all their subordinates are liable too for the same thing. So I keep pointing out to everyone to look at Article 33, because it states very clearly that they cannot be reliant on following the orders of a government as a defence, or their position. They are individually criminally liable for their decision to cause the harm.
It's like the Nuremberg trials, where you just can't say, I was just doing my job anymore.
Yeah, no, and they can't, because, even from the mass animal torture, that's like super criminal, but the poisoning of water and food system of humans and livestock agriculture is the collapse of our entire ecosystem and life as we know it. And
it's the mass extinction, as you said, and a crime against humanity and a crime against Mother Earth.
Yeah, it is. It's unimaginable. It's so shocking, and it's happening right now. We have just been hit, and theoretically, it says it's spread. The poisoning drops are spread, but most of that poison has been inflicted in the last month. So that's enough to kill between 41 million and potentially 122 million, or potentially much more, depending on the real dose of those poison pellets now, and being higher, and them overflying, dumping much more than's on the permit, and poisoning much, more than 6 kgs a hectare potentially. We don't know. There's no oversight, there's no testing, and they're obviously running a genocidal extermination. So could be much worse than what there is on the permit and what they're reporting. Much worse, very likely much worse. So they're killing nature in real time, all of it, by torture chemicals. Terrible.
As we speak. Miriam, thank you so much for your time and for your great work, and I really look forward to the positive outcome, and I look forward to the imprisonment and the arrest and imprisonment of these perpetrators.
So do I.
Yeah.
Nothing will give me more pleasure than seeing them all lined up and put in prison. I could say something much worse, obviously. I quite often do. I like to write poems just to get it out. And then in the poems, I say I want to see them hung in the town square.
Yes.
No, got to be honest at times.
Yeah. We'll be following this case avidly as it goes through the International Criminal Court, and please keep us posted. I would like to follow up with an update as this case continues. It's not over by any means, and while we're still alive and have breath in our lungs, we're here and we're awake and we know what's happening. We have a chance.
Yeah.
If anybody could help Miriam with that $6,000 to raise for her case, you know, to bring it forward and to get this ball rolling. It would be gratefully appreciated by everybody, by humanity, and by future generations. I really thank you so much, Miriam, for your time. I know there's so much more to talk about, and I would like to do a follow-up.
A lot.
Yeah, I would like to do a follow-up interview, and on the notes under this video, we'll include some links, and if anybody has any questions, they can contact us, Miriam or myself, and we'll, connect you with the right things, especially anyone that could possibly be so kind and generous as to donate to this very meaningful cause that's going to affect the lives of millions. Yeah,
honestly, these cases, the three main cases, they need a room full of lawyers right now. You know, at the moment, it's pretty much me working constantly on them. But, on the IJC case where Australia took Japan to court, there were at least like 20 lawyers on that for 2 years. They usually take huge teams. So my hope is to even get financing for a small team of some really, really dedicated lawyers and researchers to take these cases to a new level that just compel everyone to act and tip it over. That's what we need right now.
Yeah, and if there's any lawyers listening to this, please contact Miriam. Please get in contact and see, how you could be of any assistance, because the more researchers and brains we've got on this, the better. Any seasoned environmental activists and people who've, been privy to such cases are very welcome to join this from anywhere. I'm sure.
Well, I just have to caution there. I'm really careful about who I connect it with, because so many people are on the other side, and I've done these cases for 7 years, and so much controlled opposition. Usually the first people to contact you are the ones working for the other side. So it's not as simple as that now. I just learned my lesson enough, if you know what I mean. So but there are, for example, in Australia on the coral reef, on the Great Barrier Reef case, the case to defend the Great Barrier Reef and all other coral reefs if we were successful. The Environmental Defenders Office have already signed a contract with me to work on that, and their lawyers have already begun work on it. And if we were financed, if I had the money to finance them to the next stage, they'd have their whole team developing that next submission to the court. I've been doing updates to the court since 2015 on that case. But, we'd have a chance to stop what they're doing to the Great Barrier Reef, and it tracks right back into all the industrialists like Gina Reinhardt and Adani.
Yeah.
And so it gets all of them, but that's just like me dealing with the lawyer, like bringing their body of knowledge into my argument and joining forces is what we began doing, but we're in serious need of financing. I think the next stage of financing them for it was 11,000, and that's just another preliminary round. Like the cost of these cases to actually have the teams working on them to move them forward to a significant level are huge. But unfortunately, honestly, the reason I identified the Rome Statute was because it's the only law that exists capable of being interpreted to stop these crimes. And across my 7 cases, you'd literally fix the world. If they were all prosecuted to success, most of the criminals would be arrested. The biggest criminals, the ones making money on selling, defense weapons and bombing the shit out of countries and destroying them, and the ones poisoning everything by industrial extractions, and the ones chemically exterminating us with weaponized weather and water. So I don't know, big dream, but it's been a long journey. That's the plan.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for all your hard work, and I know it's going to continue, and Goddess bless you for everything that you're doing for the planet and for her children. I appreciate your courage, and I know that so many viewers too, and we'll be following this as this progresses, because this ain't over yet.
Not yet. Still a little bit of fight.
Mm.
Yeah, no, it was lovely to talk. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Miriam, and we'll be in touch soon again. And thank you very much to all the viewers supporting this. And if there's any way that you guys can, offer some donations, that'd be very much appreciated. So thank you, everyone, for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.